Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod TV's newest show, American Politics, with Adam Lamparello and David K. Johnston. I will be your commentator tonight. My name is Kimberly Calhoun. You can see the name right down there. Hello, Adam. How are you doing? Hello, David. I'd like to give a little quick introduction to everyone. And I'm going to kind of readjust the screen just a little bit. There we go. So I think I got David to my left and Adam to my right. So that works, left and right. So Adam Lamparello is an attorney and a professor at Georgia College and State University, where he is also highly respected as a debate coach. Adam specializes in constitutional law, and he has written and published numerous textbooks and articles focused on constitutional law and the Supreme Court. I'm actually reading one of his books that he co-authored. There you go. The United States Supreme Court's Assault on the Constitution, Democracy, and the Rule of Law. Adam was also one of the panelists of a pilot TV show called America on Trial, which I really enjoyed watching. And he has also made special appearances on Pod TV's World Edition to share some of his knowledge of various subjects in the constitutional law. Welcome back, Adam.
Thanks.
And as I mentioned, to my left, we have David K. Johnston, who is an American investigative journalist and author, a specialist in economics and tax issues, and the winner of the 2001 Pulitzer Prize for Best Reporting, which was a result from his penetrating and enterprising reporting that exposed loopholes and inequities in the United States tax code, which was very instrumental in bringing about the reforms that were very necessary. One of my favorites, where the tax laws were changed to lessen the burden of farmers in 2001. David's reporting demonstrated the tragic stories where farmers were having to sell off their farms to pay their taxes. For over 10 years, David was the tax reporter for the New York Times, and he has spent a long part of his career writing about Donald Trump, which his latest book was published in 2018. It's Even Worse Than You Think. David has also been a frequent guest, making special appearances on our network over the years, and it has been a while since we have had the pleasure of seeing him here. Welcome back, David. I just want
to Kim, two things I need to clean up. The stories about farmers, what I showed is they were lies, that no one could find a single farmer who lost their home to the estate tax and in the whole country. That was a lie. And my most recent book is The Big Cheat in 2021.
I haven't read that book.
His family. And I still teach law at Syracuse University. Okay.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that. And David is beaming all the way in from the Pacific on the island. What island is it out there?
No, I'm in Santa Cruz, California, where I grew up.
Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. Sorry for that mess up. Let's get straight to our analysis of this debate tonight, which was between the President, Joe Biden, and the former president and heavyweight of this match, Donald Trump, who was the 45th president of the United States. They're battling it out for the 47th seat. So let's talk about what you guys thought of this debate. And David, I'm going to start with you. Who do you think actually won this debate and why?
I don't think either of them won the debate. I think the idea of the new format is much better than having an audience and some other rules in the past. But if the purpose of the debate is to move voters, Donald did a terrific job of reaching to his base and somewhat trying to reach out to other people. Biden started off, I thought, quite badly. Unlike Donald, who is an experienced television performer, Biden is not. So he stood there with his mouth a little agape and looking a bit like a deer in the headlights. But as the debate went on, things changed a little bit. Uh, Donald repeatedly avoided questions where there's a policy issue. And that's because Donald doesn't know anything about policy. It's all bluster. And he um, began stating various things that are just flat out lies, denying having said things for which we have videotapes, blaming other people. And I think that somewhat offset Biden's poor opening. But overall, I don't think either of them moved a significant number of voters. And that would be the point of a debate, to gain voters or take them away from your opponent.
Okay. And David, what do you think? Adam, what do you think?
Trump won the debate. He came off as more confident, more presidential, and more coherent. Second, Trump highlighted the weaknesses in Biden's presidency, starting with immigration to inflation and the economy, for which Biden did not provide satisfactory answers. And the last thing I'll say is that Biden did not look articulate. He did not look confident. And many of his answers were he stumbled and he just looked feeble. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump was perfect. As the debate went on, as David said, Biden did get better. But I think the perception is that Trump came across, like I said, as more confident, more presidential, more coherent, and ultimately he attacked Biden on weaknesses that Biden did not address sufficiently. And although they were not both perfect, Trump comes out the winner. And where this may move the needle is among those 17% of independents and other voters who say they are undecided.
Okay, well, that's well put. Unfortunately, my internet was down. I think that's one of the things they need to fix out here when one of them becomes president. So I missed a lot of it. So I'm going to start with Adam on this question. What were the best and worst moments for Trump? We'll start with Trump first, and then tell me about Biden. And
the best moments for Trump, I would say three things. Number one, Trump came across as confident and presidential. If you look at Trump's performance in the first debate in 2020, he consistently interrupted Biden, he did not let him speak, and he seemed generally unhinged. Tonight, he was more presidential, he was more restrained, and he answered the questions more directly. I think another good moment for Trump was when he hit Biden on the border repeatedly and on inflation. Now, there were some moments that Trump could have done better. He really didn't answer the questions relating to childcare, relating to how he would help improve mental health treatment in this country. And at the end of the debate, it took him a little while before he said he would absolutely accept the results of the 2024 election. So Trump was good. He was not great. As far as Biden goes, Biden's best moment was probably, it honestly is difficult to say that he had a best moment. I don't think he had one. I think his worst moment.
Pull one out of the hat, just one.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think he had a best moment. I think he had some good moments, but nothing stands out to me. He did have a couple of difficult moments when he struggled with statistics and meandered somewhat in his responses and sometimes got lost in his answers. Having said that, there were moments when Biden was strong, particularly when he was talking about veterans. So Biden did some good things. He wasn't perfect either, but ultimately, Trump was the winner.
Well, okay. So, David, would you agree with this? And what are your comments on the worst moments? And
well, you have to remember that the audience watching this varies from people who are deeply informed about policy and people who pay little to no attention. So Donald lied repeatedly throughout his comments. If you don't know that he's lying when he says various things, then he may seem to be presidential to people. So Donald, as I said, is an experienced performer, and he knows how to perform. But he avoided any kind of significant detail in anything he did. Unfortunately, he wasn't asked some questions that would have flummoxed him. For example, what's the difference between a Sunni and a Shia Muslim? What's Wahhabism? Or what is the difference between Medicaid and Medicare? Donald wouldn't know the answers to those questions. Joe Biden would. Biden fell into the same pattern that Hillary Clinton did in 2016. instead of presenting something with a visceral feeling to it. This administration has gotten the price of insulin down to $35 from $400. Some people were paying over $1,000. Now it's $35 a month, not $1,000 a month. He gave an answer that was too complex, and he referred to the ACA. Now, we all know that that's the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. But to a lot of people, what's the ACA? And a lot of the people watching this debate are people who are not deeply into politics. They're not completely uninformed, but they're not sensitive to, and they're not policy people. And Hillary Clinton in the 2016 campaign would give speeches where she would lay out policy ideas that I think Adam would agree generally were pretty solid ideas. There were people on both sides of the aisle who thought some of her ideas about high-tech manufacturing, for example. But she came across as blah, 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 blah. Oh, and footnote 15, blah, 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 blah. And then blah, 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 blah. Whereas Donald would just come in and say, bang, 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 whether it was true or not. And that is very troubling. I mean, it tells me that the Biden comm staff did a terrible job preparing him to go here. There were a lot of points he could have scored on Donald. You didn't know why the USS Arizona Memorial was there. It was your chief of staff, a four-star general, who attributes the losers and suckers comment to you and could have buttressed it by saying, just as you said, I don't like losers, and denigrated John McCain, an authentic American war hero who was a prisoner of war. Biden did not drive these points home, and I think it reflects that Biden is a guy who works in the world of politics. He knows how to make deals with people. He's made incredibly strong deals with a tiny majority in the House, but he's not someone like Donald who can project this image Donald does. And for Donald, I think that the worst for him was at the end. I thought Biden's strategy would be to get under his skin and perhaps make fun of him, but he did not do very well if that was his strategy. Donald told some whoppers at the end, but most people won't know they were whoppers. They'll just know that Joe said malarkey.
Right.
Kim, can I say something?
Well, yeah, sure. Okay.
When voters go to the polls, what they care about is themselves. What are they paying at the gas pump? What are they paying at the grocery store? What taxes are they paying? What are the price of homes? How secure is our border? And how safe is our world? On every front, Trump hit Biden, and Biden did not have a sufficient response. Now, Biden can talk about...
I think you're right. He hit him very hard on those points, and Biden didn't come back well, even though the facts don't go with Donald. Donald, in 4 years, ran up budget deficits more than twice as large as Joe's. Donald said because of the corporate tax, all this money flowed in. I just looked it up in the official government data. No, the corporate income tax revenues fell 45% because of Donald's cuts. He said there were all these jobs. Donald Trump, before the pandemic, created jobs at a rate 3% less than Obama did once the Great Recession was over. And if we're not going to blame Donald for the pandemic, we shouldn't hold anybody else accountable for things they're not in control of. So if you start a year after Obama became president, for the 72 remaining months of 7 years of his presidency, he created jobs at a rate 3% greater than Trump. If you go to the bounce back argument that Trump made, Biden should have said, there was no guarantee that jobs would bounce back. They bounced back because of what my administration did. And then he could have said, and by the way, let's give you credit for those jobs, what you call the bounce back. You know what? On a monthly basis, I'm creating jobs at a 10% higher rate than you did. He didn't do those things, and I was stunned by that. He also didn't do the thing I've written about that I thought would have been very effective with Donald. Joe Biden, rides a bicycle very quickly. He walks funny because he has arthritis in his spine. And I had suggested both on TV and in writing that Biden should drop to the floor, do one-arm push-ups, which he can do, and challenged Donald to do so. He could have even then said, "How, Donald, you can use both arms."
Well,
I think a physical that would be fun, a physical debate. Let's get to the next question real quick.
Well, 1 second. I have to respond to this. I agree with David that Biden failed to offer those types of responses. And in that respect, he's right. And that's why Biden did not win the debate. I also think the American voter is not a policy wonk and doesn't really want to get in the weeds and into the details. True. Instead, the average American voter wakes up in the morning and says, how much are my groceries to feed my family? How much is gas costing so that I can get a full tank of gas? How much does it cost to buy a house? How secure is our border? How safe is our country?
I mean,
and under Biden,
I will admit,
you're interrupting me, but I'm trying to offer an explanation.
Right. I didn't want to hear him talk about, well, your son did this and this. I don't care what Biden's son did any more than I care what Trump's son does. I want to hear what you're going to do for me. I don't want to hear any more name calling. I want to hear, but let's get to the next question then. And now, as we expected, the moderators did question Trump about the events of January 6th and the importance of preserving democracy. I also was impressed. This was part that I did get to hear, and I think they asked him twice, if I'm not mistaken. Would he, I guess I'm going to put it in simple terms, would he be a sore loser again? But I don't think they asked it that way. They're more eloquent than me. But David, what are your thoughts on Trump's response? And do you think it was effective?
Well, the first time around, Donald evaded the question. And when he finally got called back to it, he did not say he would accept the results of the election. He said, well, if it's a full and fair election, I'll do so. And, why are we questioning whether it's going to be a full or fair election? After all, courts looked at 61 different matters Trump and his people brought up. Not one judge ruled for him. Several judges, Republican judges, said, you don't have anything. You didn't present any evidence whatsoever to us. And Biden should have been much stronger on exactly that. And on the January 6th matter, Donald, is trying to create this impression that this was really a peaceful protest. It was appropriate, et cetera. And that's not going to do him well, but I don't think with people who haven't decided how they want to vote, that's going to move things very much.
I'm okay, Adam. And what are your thoughts on this? I mean, because, we are talking about, a president's behavior because he lost. I mean, what do you think? How was his answer? I mean, he evaded the question the first time. That was obvious.
His answer was average. It was not great, but it was not bad. January 6th was a horrible day, and Donald Trump's behavior on that day was completely unacceptable. Having said that, voters are not going to gravitate towards a theme of preserving democracy. It is far too abstract. They care about what hits them on a daily basis, like I said, whether it's gas prices, whether it's inflation, whether it's home prices, the border, our security. That is what they care about, and that is what Donald Trump spoke to. And like David said, maybe what Donald Trump said was inaccurate, but politics is a lot about perception. And the perception tonight was that Donald Trump was more presidential, coherent, confident, and related to the concerns of the American voter, and that's why he won.
Well, I mean, they did have to go back to him twice on that question, so I have to question the coherent part. But let's, when we're talking about preserving the democracy, and will it influence the voters? And David, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a great many Americans take their freedom and liberty for granted. Donald has declared he will be a dictator the day he returns to office. And then he goes, just for one day. If you can show me anybody who assumed dictatorial powers and gave them up, I'll contribute $1,000 to your favorite charity. I wrote in 2015, remember I've known Donald well now since 1988. Right. And my batting average on him so far is 99.99, and the one item will come. I predicted it too soon. Donald does not believe in democracy. He has no idea what's in our Constitution. He has said, I have an Article 2 that says I can do anything I want. The Constitution doesn't say anything like that. For 3 hours, he did nothing as his daughter, as staff aides, as his appointees came in and said, you've got to speak out and stop this attack. This was a coup. This was a failed effort to overthrow the government of the United States. And I predicted in writing in 2015, if Donald gets to the White House, he will never leave peacefully. Well, in the case of democracy and people taking their liberties for granted, liberties that more than 1 million people have died for, my father became a 100% disabled veteran defending, they'll discover real quickly how much they don't like it if they lose their liberties. And if Donald goes back to the White House, I believe it will be the end of American democracy. He will never leave the White House, and we will see a transition take place, and it will start with his acts of revenge. Yeah. And who's ever heard of a president saying revenge? But I agree, if people simply vote their pocketbooks, which is what the great political scientist V.O. Key wrote in the book that came out just after he died in 1962, Americans vote their pocketbooks, as Adam well knows. I think that Donald Trump will do very well. By the way, one of the things Joe should have hit back on is Trump keeps saying food prices are up 2, 3, 4 times, 5 times. He said at one point, not in this debate, but in a TV interview. And the fact is the price of milk's actually down when you adjust for inflation. So the price of eggs is down. And why were gas prices so cheap in 2020? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because there was no economic activity going on. People weren't going to the office. They weren't burning fuel. But Biden didn't use those points effectively against Donald, except to people who are already very deeply steeped in policy.
I agree with David. And all I'm going to say briefly is that Trump cannot be a dictator. You have a constitution that structurally has separation of powers and checks and balances.
Adam, it's a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper.
The real threat to democracy is a biased media and academia, which is so one-sided, and the influence of money and its corruptive influence in politics. Okay? People aren't going to go to the polls and say, I'm going here to preserve democracy. They're going to say, I'm going there to preserve my security. When I wake up in the morning, I don't want to pay $50 to fill my gas tank anymore. I don't want to go to the grocery store and spend $200 when 4 or 5 years ago I was spending $125. They're going to vote their own interest. As Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. Trump tapped into that tonight. Biden didn't have a sufficient response. That's why he won, and that's why he may sway some of those 17% who are undecided, which will inch him closer to the White House.
You know, there are a lot of different things that are involved here, but we were still discussing January 6th and whether preserving democracy will influence the voters. But let's move to the next discussion, which, you know, we all knew was going to come about. In fact, I caught bits and pieces of this one, but it focused on immigration and inflation, which you brought up, but which has affected significantly Biden's approval ratings. And people, like you said, they reflect this based on their current wallet or pocket. But I will tell you this, a lot of people are not struggling. Their investments are doing very well. We saw food prices go up, but that went up, I believe, because of gas prices. But I mean, that's all for another conversation. But do you think that their discussion and their responses will improve their ratings? You know, let's start with, did it improve Biden's rating, David?
You're talking about immigration, right?
Yeah, immigration.
Yeah. I think that this did not go well for Biden on immigration. And unfortunately, I don't think most Americans understand that it is U.S. foreign policy that's driving people in Honduras, where my wife and I had relatives and owned a home. People are, when you're told that your 12-year-old daughter is going to be impressed into prostitution as soon as she turns 12, or your son will be made an assassin, they leave and come to America seeking refuge. And why do we have that situation? Because the U.S. foreign policy that has turned that into a criminal country.
Right.
That's just way beyond most American voters, and Donald can exploit that very well. Joe Biden should have brought up that Reagan was in favor of an amnesty. He should have brought up how the fact that so many people are coming into the country is a factor in our economies doing very well, because farmers and others who have jobs most Americans don't want are benefiting from people who are in our country without permission. That's not arguing we should do it, but it's actually having a positive economic effect. And by the way, you're quite right about food prices. Higher energy prices are the principal reason for food, followed by oligopolies. We have, 4 companies control 85% of the beef business, et cetera, and competition lowers prices. Donald is very much a monopolist. Plenty of stuff on the record for him for years. He's a monopolist at heart. He doesn't believe in competition. Biden has done a number of things to enhance competition. But again, that's beyond the ken of the vast majority of voters.
Well,
yeah, Adam, kind of tell us what you think about that.
I think there's 2 aspects to this issue. I think Biden did not respond well to the concerns raised about immigration, which are among the concerns of American voters, because under his administration, we've not had border security. We've had issues with fentanyl coming into this country. We need more administrative law judges. We don't have them. And what we've seen are heart-wrenching tales, like that of a 12-year-old girl who was just strangled by 2 undocumented immigrants. And in the state where this debate was tonight, in Georgia, a University of Georgia student was murdered brutally by an undocumented immigrant. Now, let me be clear. Immigration is a good thing. We want to welcome people into this country, but we have to do so responsibly. So on that score, Biden did not do well. But Trump did not do well either, because Trump has made comments about massive deportations that lack such a degree of empathy that it really does not resonate with the American people. You have to have compassion for people while securing the border. The right policy is to give amnesty or a path to citizenship for undocumented families here who are trying to make a living and who are trying to better their lives, while also securing the border so that we don't have as much fentanyl coming in and we don't have people coming in that commit the kind of crimes that occurred in Texas and Georgia. There's a middle ground approach that both parties can get around. Donald Trump failed to express that sentiment tonight. Joe Biden has failed at the border. And ultimately, when you're dealing with an election and a rematch like this, voters are going to go with the person who is offering at least some solution rather than the one who's the incumbent and has a failed solution.
Adam, I'll bet you'll agree with this. Biden should have said, we had a bipartisan bill that would address the border crisis, and you told Republicans submarine it so you could run on this issue. And he should have hammered that.
I agree.
I agree with that. I mean, there is no mistake that there is a problem.
But Kim, I'll also say this. Trump's biggest enemy, and it came out in this debate, is himself. Some of the comments he makes are so inflammatory, whether it's on Truth Social or even in this debate, that we're going to engage in these mass deportations of people. Do you know what that would do to families? Okay.
Or business.
Not every person who comes to this country is a criminal, is a bad person. Of course not. You have to show empathy because leadership requires empathy, it requires moderation, and it requires compromise. Trump, in the second half of this debate, did not do a good job of that. And if he continues to do that, he may alienate the very voters he needs to return to the White House.
And Adam, on that point, people who are here without permission, you can call them illegals or whatever you want to call them, they are far less likely to commit any crimes. We have a couple of outrageous examples that are recent.
That's correct.
But overall, because they want to stay here, they don't want any contact with the police. You know, if they see that they have a red light that's out, they'll get it fixed right away so they don't get pulled over and then they end up in a mess. So as a class, and Biden could have made that point. I suspect that that's one that they decided not to make because they were concerned about how it would be read. But it is.
I want to clarify something too. A lot of people are truly misinformed about something because this is something I worked on for years, but not that most of the drugs come across the border on the trucks and the people. They don't come that way. Right. They're coming on our planes, into our airports, our private airports. They are not coming into the border as if they're coming across on somebody's back.
No, and many of them. Many of them, Kimberly, come through that 110 square mile Union Pacific rail yard that straddles the border down at El Paso and in New Mexico with Mexico. Union Pacific was found to have been just looking the other way at huge amounts of drugs. And by the way, the Trump administration wiped out their penalties for doing that.
Well, they also arrested a border patrol agent for looking the other way. They found hundreds of thousands of dollars in his pocket. And the punishment was very minimal. They barely punished him. So I think that's our biggest problem.
That doesn't move voters.
No, it doesn't. Right. And that's our biggest problem today is enforcing the immigration laws that need to be put into place, but also enforcing when you catch somebody bringing drugs into this country, and that's not happening, which tells me a lot of people have their hands in that cookie jar. But let's move to another one real quick here. Let's move to the one topic that's near and dear to my heart because of what happens and the results from it and not from it are the abortion fights that we're getting into. And I want to add before you guys keep going, one of the problems I have since Trump has been in office and now Biden is this country has been completely divided. And I wish we could find a president that could unite us again. But this issue right here really bothers me. So can we talk about what your thoughts were on how their responses were on the abortion issues?
Adam, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, sure. David.
You want me to go first? Abortion was not an issue in this country until Phyllis Schlafly and some others discovered they could exploit it. And Biden's argument supporting Roe, I don't think is a particularly strong argument. I think it would have been better if he had come out and said, a woman's health care is between she and her doctor, end of discussion. When Trump literally said at one point, they're aborting fetuses after they're born, which is just nonsense. But he brought it up more sophisticated way this time. They're killing babies after the fact. The simple truth is that 1 in 6 known pregnancies does not go well. Spontaneous abortions, other problems. And just to be clear about this, I've been in the position of who are you going to save in delivery, the mother or the child, and had to make that decision. And it's none of the government's damn business. The Biden could have been much stronger on this. He should have said, my administration will protect the reproductive rights of women. We are going to get politicians out of the doctor's room. And he didn't. Donald bobbed and weaved, and he's been all over the place on this. And then the moderators failed to tie him down. And Biden should have come after him to tie him down. So basically, Donald got a pass on this one for the moment. But let me point out, everywhere that this issue has been on the ballot through a candidate or a measure, the Dobbs decision and the direction the Republicans are going loses and loses badly. That's why Biden should have really tagged Donald with this.
So, Adam, how would you reply to this? Do you agree?
I agree in part. In the second half of the debate, when they discussed abortion, Trump did not do what he should have done, give a direct and clear answer. Now, let's talk about abortion for a second. Roe versus Wade was one of the worst decisions in the 20th century as a matter of constitutional law because it was not based on the text of the Constitution or any right that could be reasonably inferred from it. And if you believe in democracy, the first thing you're against is having 9 unelected life tenured judges create rights out of thin air and take them away from the democratic process. Roe was a bad decision, and Dobbs was correct to overturn it. Having said that, personally, I am pro-choice. Well, hold on. Personally, I am pro-choice, but the issue of abortion should be decided by the people of every state through the democratic process, because a government that gives people the power to make laws from the bottom up instead of unelected justice from the top down is democratic. So maybe New York is going to allow abortions up to the 9th week of pregnancy. Maybe California will. Maybe Connecticut will. Maybe New Mexico will. Maybe New Jersey will. Maybe Minnesota and Michigan will. But maybe Alabama and Arkansas won't. That's democracy. And sometimes it's better to be divided rather than united, because the unique needs, preferences, and values of the people should have more weight than what 9 unelected justices from Harvard and Yale have to say. So what Trump should have said was, I will never support a federal ban on abortion, because the whole movement to overturn Roe was to return it to the people and not have the federal government doing that. Trump did not see that clearly tonight, and on that score, he also failed.
On that score, he failed. But I want to ask a question. What about women's HIPAA rights and privacies, and then their personal choice for their personal well-being and healthcare? And what about the 24 million children every year that are abused and in abusive homes because the homes can't afford them, and that are not just abused, but many killed, suffering, starving, hungry, because the families really didn't want them? Are we forcing women to have babies when we shouldn't be?
Well, Kimberly,
it seems like what you're saying, it's Kim. It seems like what you're making an argument to me, Kim, and you're making an argument.
Looking for pro-life solutions, not pro-birth.
Well, maybe. Well, listen, and I'll give you a solution. I'll give you a solution. The solution is through the democratic process, through the legislative process at the state level. Everything you just said was a policy argument. The Supreme Court is not in the business of inventing rights or creating policy. It's in the business of interpreting the Constitution. Now, you make that argument before a state legislature in North Carolina, New Jersey, or North Dakota, and you pass that law, it has every right to be enforced. Your issue is not with the court. Your issue is with the legislature, and that's where your argument should be directed.
Well, my issue is the fact that there are 24 million children who suffer. Our country spends billions of dollars.
There's also 20 million undocumented immigrants in this country, increasing by the day.
Right. Yeah, okay, David, how do you feel?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with Adam about Roe. The Constitution is very clear that you have a right of privacy. Just look at the Third Amendment. One of the things I teach my students. There's a clear right of privacy implied in the Constitution. The Roe decision was a terrible decision because it was based on bad understanding of science that was going to change as our knowledge of biology changed going forward, okay? And we have a Supreme Court right now that literally in overturning Roe cited as legal authorities 2 1600s witch hunters who burned women at the stake. That just tells you that this majority on the court currently doesn't interpret the Constitution. It is imposing its members' views on the rest of us. But on this issue as a matter before the voters, what matters is going to be how women feel, not just women who are in their reproductive years, because older women, they have daughters, grandchildren, sisters, friends, how they feel about this. And given that Project 2025, which is aligned with Trump, wants to, in the words of one of its leaders, we want to make all sex consequential. They want to ban contraception. Yes, I can't imagine that a winning argument with not maybe at my age, not a big deal, but with people who are in, between when they lose their virginity until they're in their 50s. That's not a winning argument with them. And that's an argument on which the Democrats and Biden can gain a lot of voters. And Biden was inarticulate about this. He was, as with Hillary Clinton in 2016, focused on fine details instead of the visceral aspects of this. And let me be clear, I've thought for some time that Biden's comms team in the White House is not serving him well. They're protecting him all the time instead of being out front. I mean, Why hasn't they come out and said, the president walks a little funny because he has spinal arthritis. Not that means he's enfeebled. And by the way, I also suspect they should have had him take a nap this afternoon. They didn't do that. They should have. But on the abortion issue, Donald got a free pass tonight because Biden didn't drive it home.
Well, David, you brought up something else that should have been mentioned in this debate, and it was not, is the fact that they are trying to ban the access to contraceptives to women, not to men.
Who's they?
Women.
Who's they?
The Donald's team, the Project 25 people, a number of religious groups. There's Adam. I can document to you 6 ways to Sunday all the Trump supporters who are pushing for banning contraception.
So if you're banning contraceptions and then you're forcing women to be chained to their beds while they're pregnant, you're
and then you don't provide care for children.
I will say 2 things about that, Kim. Number one, where Trump failed tonight was being clear with the voters. I said before, politics is about perception. Voters want clear, definite answers. Trump should have said there will be no federal ban on abortion. It will be left to the states in the democratic process because that's what preserving democracy really means. And we will not engage in any attempt to outlaw contraception. Done. He didn't do that, and that was a failure. But the second thing I'll say is there is no way that Donald Trump is going to do that when he gets into office. There is no way that that's going to happen.
He's going to do what?
And if it happens at the state level, the solution is to vote those elected leaders out of office. That's preserving democracy and preserving the people's right to vote on the policies under which they're governed. When you give a Supreme Court the power, like we did through the 14th Amendment, to invent rights out of thin air, what you give the Supreme Court, you also allow them to take away. And sure enough, 51 years later, guess what happened in Dobbs? 9 unelected justices did precisely what nobody wanted them to do and what they couldn't have done if abortion was the result of a state democratic process that the court couldn't touch.
Jim, the audience should know that what Adam is talking about is the due process rights in the 14th Amendment. And Adam is saying that we should take away those due process rights in the Constitution. And boy,
no.
You just said judges are using the 14th Amendment to invent law.
They are misinterpreting it to create rights out of thin air when the amendment was not designed to do so. That's like taking the First Amendment and interpreting it to mean that corporations are people and that Congress cannot regulate expenditures that ultimately lead to unfair influence in the electoral process. Citizens United was just as bad as Roe, and it shows you whether you're a liberal or you're conservative. When you give the courts that power, they're going to interpret it in ways that damage both parties and give less power to the people. That's wrong, and that's anti-democratic. And Kim, I'm surprised when you talk about preserving democracy, you don't talk about that.
Well, I'd like to preserve life. I don't care about democracy right now. I want to preserve a healthy life, not just throw a life into the world.
I want to preserve unhealthy lives too. All lives matter.
You don't. You just want babies being born. David, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a more expansive view of our Constitution's purpose than Adam does. After all, the preamble, which is not law, says that one of the purposes of Congress is to promote the general welfare. And we are the only major nation in the world that doesn't have universal health care, the only major nation where people go bankrupt or die for lack of health care. Just doesn't happen in the other advanced countries in the world. We're the only ones that don't have mandatory parental leave from your work. In some countries, you must take a year off work, and you're paid 90% of your wages when you have a child. We don't provide any kind of adequate support for children after they're born. And those are all things that I believe are more than justified under the Constitution as a practical economic matter. There's very good research that basically shows every dollar you invest in a child from the moment you know there is a pregnancy until they reach 18 earns a compound lifetime rate of 7%. If you can get an investment that will be worth 7% every year forever, go put all your money in it. You'll do fine. We have a movement that calls itself pro-life. It's not. It's, as you said, pro-birth. But I don't think that the way that this issue plays out in American politics helps either of these two guys unless we focus on, do you think women have a right to have an abortion? Whether or not the federal law or state law, is it your right, or is this the government's business, number one? Secondly, would you sign, because there's going to be that bill in Congress if the Republicans control the House and Senate the next time, will you sign a national abortion ban bill? And Donald has indicated in a couple of forums he would. I mean, he dances around about this. He's changed his views on this radically over the last 36 years. Biden really blew an opportunity to take the Dobbs issue and make it a strong issue for the Democrats generally and for him in particular, because he just, he was too focused on minutia and not, as Donald is masterful at. I mean, Donald did not become, as I've called him, the world's greatest con artist by not knowing his stuff. He knows how to get you to suspend your skepticism, and he knows how to talk to you in a visceral way. He ran for president using some of my ideas, and the way I told them and the way he presented them, they were technically the same, but his was very visceral. Mine was much more intellectual.
Well, Donald is definitely skilled at selling people on what he wants them to buy from him. He really is. I mean, that's one of his biggest skill sets. I think he was really good sometimes with the foreign affairs. I'm not quite sure what he was doing behind the scenes. We never will know, but they all do it. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the foreign policies. Let's move away from this touchy subject of abortion and go into the foreign policy and talk about the wars. I'm going to go to Adam first. Adam, what were your thoughts, particularly on their response on the Ukraine war at this point, the Ukraine war? What do you think their response was?
I think both of their responses were poor. I do not think that the American voter is going to base their vote on what's happening in Ukraine or what's happening in Gaza. Having said that, and like I've said repeatedly, voters want to hear not only what the problem is, they want to hear what the solution is. And they want to hear it in about 30 seconds in a simple, straight, and definite form. Neither did that tonight. Instead, Trump criticized Biden for the Afghanistan withdrawal. Trump criticized Biden for the Ukraine war and for giving billions to Ukraine. But when Trump was asked what he would do, he didn't offer a satisfactory response. Conversely, Biden did not offer a sufficient justification for the increased spending. But when it came down to Israel and Gaza, that's where neither of them presented a solution that would actually end this conflict, save lives, and achieve some semblance of peace. What Trump should have said was, yes, I believe in a two-state solution once Hamas is completely eradicated. Instead, like David has been saying, he dances around the issue and meanders. And when Biden has an opportunity to capitalize, he doesn't. So ultimately, what's the tiebreaker here? Trump looked more presidential and confident, and ultimately that carried the day.
Well, he could dance, can't he? David, do you agree with Adam's response on that?
I absolutely agree that neither of them did this well. Biden should have come out and said, we're the United States of America. We are opposed to tyranny. We stopped the Nazis. We stopped the Kaiser. Yeah. We fought a civil war for liberty, and we are not going to allow the Kremlin to put under its boot any part of Ukraine, because if they succeed, Putin has said repeatedly he will move on and he's going to attack Poland and Moldova and other countries. And he should have hammered that hard and said, we do not do that. And by the way, not a single American soldier is over there fighting. And we haven't given hardly any money at all to the country. We're employing Americans making bullets and drones and bombs and sophisticated electronic equipment that we then give the Ukrainians so they can stay a free people. Oh, and one more thing Biden should have said. Donald has said Putin should be able to let Putin do whatever the hell he wants.
Yeah.
He is for Putin. He is against democracy and freedom. And you can't say we're for freedom for us as if we live in a vacuum. We live on one small planet. And so I think Biden really missed an enormous opportunity. Someday in the future, we will hear from his staff what went on in the prep for this debate. And I don't think it's going to be good. Donald skipped and traced around and Donald doesn't know anything about the Middle East. And one of the questions I really wish had been asked, and Biden could have said, well, if you know so much about the Middle East, Donald, just tell us the difference between Sunnis and Shias and how Wahhabism differs from that. And when Donald evaded, he said, come on, answer the question, because I assure you, Donald doesn't have a clue about that.
No,
David, it sounds like you should have been on Biden's prep team, because a lot of what you're saying would have benefited him.
I listened to you, and both
Biden was speaking way too fast.
Yes.
He seemed far too rehearsed. And when it comes down to the perception, Trump came across as the antithesis of what he was at that first debate in 2020. He came across as presidential, restrained, and calm. Biden came across as speaking far too fast, which made him look rehearsed, and his answers were far too convoluted. And when he got really angry and called Trump a whiner, it did not look presidential. And at the end of the day, voters don't make a decision based on policy, get there into the weeds of policy or foreign policy. At the end of the day, say, who's going to be better for me? And on that score, Trump won tonight.
Well, and I wanted to get into the demeanor and style, but David, do you think that there could have been more said? I mean, you mentioned that just let Putin do whatever he wants. Is there anything else that we could be doing
with the Ukraine war?
Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, the object is not to get. The object is to not get NATO and the U.S. drawn into any of the fighting directly. So, if we hadn't had the pause in the I follow the war very closely, and I have a couple of military advisors who help me with this. If we hadn't had the pause in supplying ammunition and whatnot, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in. But Biden could have said, the Russians are not making any significant advances and haven't for months. They have now moved their ships out of Sevastopol, and they have taken their aircraft and they have moved them out of Crimea. And once the Ukrainians succeed in recovering Crimea, things will turn for the Russians. He also could have said, we have economic sanctions that are actually working. The Russian ruble has collapsed, and it is now doing this in the charts, up and down, which is a sign of its instability. Russia is a one-note economy. 98% of reported profits in Russia are the oil industry. I don't mean just taking oil out of the ground, petrochemicals, refining, etc. And he really should have hammered the success that these sanctions, most sanctions are a joke. The sanctions put in place by Biden and American allies are actually proving to be quite effective. He could have, in a sentence, simply said, we're succeeding here. And, we're not going to give up on people who want to be free. That should have been his emphasis again and again and again. This guy wants to let Putin, a dictator, win. We are going to stand up for liberty and freedom, unlike that guy. And that would have been much, much more effective than the detail stuff that we got. I disagree with Adam that Trump sounded presidential, because if you're lying, I just can't see you as being presidential. That doesn't mean, all presidents at times have to lie to protect national security. There's nothing on the table here that required any lies. But other than that, yes, Trump came across as much more confident, and that's why he's such a great con artist. He poses as something he's not.
Well, I mean, and these wars are, that we just need to maybe let them settle themselves. I don't like to say
Well,
that.
you can't let this war settle itself. If you just back off, then Vladimir Putin wins Ukraine, and he has said he intends to take back the old Soviet empire. So if you just say let them work it out, then you are saying I'm against freedom for the peoples of Eastern Europe, because those countries, and I have relatives who live there, they'll all tell you the Russian tanks are coming if America and the NATO allies don't stand absolutely firm to Putin.
Well, we're all very aware now, at least on Pod TV, of BRICS, and we need to keep a close eye on them. We have NATO, but they have BRICS, and we need to watch that. And I think that they're all uniting very closely along with China. So we've kind of covered their demeanor and style, but let's kind of narrow it down. What was your take, Adam? What was your take on the demeanor and style of Trump versus Biden?
Trump's demeanor was better because he was more confident, he was more coherent, and he was more definite in certain areas. But all of this is relative. If you look back to 2020, the first debate, Trump interrupted Biden, he said ridiculous things, and he showed a lack of temperament that is worthy of the White House. His advisors knew that, and they convinced him to be restrained, to be clearer, to be more confident, to not interrupt, and to tap into the issues that affect every American every day. Americans don't wake up worried about Ukraine. They wake up worried about gas prices. They don't wake up worried about Putin. They wake up worried about groceries. It's the economy, stupid. And Trump tapped into that tonight with a demeanor that was far more impressive than that in 2020. And when you couple that with Biden speaking far too quickly, often meandering and seeming rehearsed, and sometimes at points very angry, Trump wins on this score.
Yeah.
David, you agree?
Oh, largely, I think that that's right. And I think that, as I said, Biden's comms team has served him very, very badly. Biden is very deeply informed about world affairs. He was chairman for years of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'll bet you almost nobody in the audience knows that during the war in Bosnia schizophrenia, Biden went there, had a secret meeting where he told the genocidal leaders who were literally gathering a whole village together and then massacring everybody, knock it off or we're going to have you arrested and you're going to die in The Hague in prison. He could have been killed doing that. He didn't shirk from that. He stood up to that. Biden's team just they're protective of him instead of getting out and having him, hit on the issues. He's got lots of good facts to run on, much better economy than under Trump. And that 60% of Americans think we're in a depression when the economy is booming is astonishing. Trump said if Joe gets elected, the economy is going to collapse and the stock market will crater. Stock market's more than doubled since Donald Trump left office in just 3 years. I mean, that's extraordinary growth. We have the lowest unemployment in this country since the early 60s. We have wages rising faster than inflation for the bottom 50% of Americans. And so I think Biden's people did not do well in prepping him for this.
No, and I agree, and I don't know what happened to Adam. He just kind of disappeared. I have no idea. Was hoping for his last remarks and comments, but we did have a interesting question here because I did hear them discuss the African American part, but Adam's back. Okay, so let's get back on schedule. We don't have much time. Adam, are you okay? You kind of disappeared there into the twilight zone.
Technical issue with my computer. My apologies.
That's okay. I think I've been having it too. What did you guys think? This is one question we're going to take from the viewers. We've been getting hit like hundreds of comments. But what did you think of his appeal to the African American community? Both claimed gains in the HBCUs. So I did hear partial this, and my computer went down. David, let's start with you.
Well, Trump did do some things to get money to the historically black colleges and universities, but it was minimal compared to what Biden has done. But I think this is another example of getting off into the weeds. Instead of talking about the HBCUs, it should have been, we made a policy mistake in America long ago. College used to be free for most public schools or close to it, and we've turned it into a business you have to borrow money for, and we're going to bring an end to that. Donald, I don't know what he would say about that particular issue, but that's what Biden certainly should have promoted as an idea. I think a lot of people would get lost, and anybody who is a racist would be offended by the answers that Biden gave, where he talked about aid that benefits Black Americans, et cetera. All the things that he described benefit all poor Americans. There are a number of American billionaires, several Black billionaires in America. There are lots of American multimillionaires. My next door neighbor used to own 2 factories. I mean, how rich, and he was Black, how rich do you have to be to own 2 factories that employ hundreds of people? So I don't think that will sway many voters. Donald claims 25% of Black voters are with him. The polling all suggests 10 or 12%, although I'm highly skeptical of polling because only about 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 people who answer the phone will then answer the questions. And so even if your demographic mix is right, you have this many older people, this many blue-collar workers, when less than 1 in 100 people will answer the questions, I think there's a self-selection bias going on.
Right. And Adam, do you agree with that?
I agree in part with that. I think it goes back to having clear and definitive answers. What Trump and Biden's team should have done was said, when you get these questions, you have 3 things that you're going to say succinctly and directly. What Trump should have said was, regarding the Black community, number 1, the unemployment rate was incredibly low. Number 2, I signed the First Step Act, which reduced jail sentences for many people, including African Americans. And number 3, I increased funding for historically Black colleges, which is a good thing. And what did Joe Biden do? He gave a hateful, vitriolic speech at Howard University in which he portrayed the graduates who should be celebrating their progress as victims. Then he should have stopped there. But no, he meandered and he let his thoughts get ahead of him instead of taking a breath and a step back and thinking about what he should say. And Biden did the exact same thing. The difference, though, again, goes back to demeanor. When you look at it relative to Trump's performances in 2020 and Biden's was a step back from last time. Trump's was a step forward. And while they both weren't great, Trump was a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree with you about that, Adam. I think it's a step back for Biden, a step forward for Trump. And that is amazing given the facts they could have relied on, which are not helpful to Donald and are very helpful to Biden. That makes this really sort of surprising.
Right. And it is. And I mean, we've seen a lot of different things happen. And then, you hear so much information from so many different networks that it's kind of hard to really know what is the truth and what isn't. And, sometimes we just have to wait until it washes itself out. But let's talk about, I'm going to change this question just a little bit, but do you think this debate will impact how many voters will actually come out?
No, I don't think this will have an effect on voter turnout. The issues that are going to have effect on voter turnout are going to be primarily Dobbs, overwhelmingly Dobbs. I don't think anything that was said tonight is going to tell people who are, remember in every presidential election since 1788, the number one category was didn't vote. So we'll have a very large turnout. Biden will win the popular vote, but he'll win by at least 10 million votes. That doesn't mean he'll go back to the White House. You have to win the right states. And if Trump's performance tonight and in the September debate wins him enough votes, and it could be just literally hundreds or a few thousand votes in the 7 states that could go either way, he can be back in the White House.
Yeah. I mean, you never know, right? And then, we have to worry about his first act, which is retribution. But, Adam, do you agree with what David said?
I agree, but before I get to that, Trump did not say that if he comes to office, he's going to seek revenge on people. He said he would have the right to seek revenge. And then Piers Morgan asked him if he would seek revenge or if he would agree not to seek revenge. And Trump said he would agree to that. I don't think that there's going to be any of that going on. What I think happened tonight was those who are entrenched to vote for Biden didn't change a thing. Those who are entrenched didn't change a thing. Among that 17% who are undecided, I think it shifted the needle very, very slightly towards Trump. And while it may have been small, it could be significant, particularly in the Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and in the Southwest, Nevada and Arizona, where this election is going to be decided. And at this point, I think Trump did himself some good tonight. And I think Biden, while he didn't hurt himself, didn't do good for himself in terms of moving the needle in his direction.
So I'm going to change a question in just a little bit more, since how we went over time anyway. I want to know, do you think it was fair or not fair to allow Kennedy into this debate, and should he be allowed in the debates coming? David, I'll start with you.
The next president of the United States is going to be either Trump or Biden, and allowing Robert F. Kennedy in would be, I think, a big mistake, as would allowing in Jill Stein. Every year, a couple hundred people register to run for president of the United States. Let's stick to the people who are going to be there. So, yes, I think the CNN made exactly the right decision, and ABC, which will host the other debate, made exactly the right decision, that it's these two guys. And they did it with an objective measure, but at the end of the day, that objective measure is subjective by its choice of facts.
So, Adam, do you agree with David's response?
I agree with David, yes.
Okay, well, let's get down to the last question, which is probably on everyone's minds. And I think we kind of already answered that, but I'm just going to, ask for your thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, David and Adam, do you think that this debate has put a win for Trump?
I don't think it's put a win in for either one of them.
Okay. All right. Okay. Adam?
I think it's a win for Trump. And I also think at this time, if the election were held today, Trump would win. But that can change. So at this point, I think we need to be cautious about saying who's going to win the White House. But given the sentiment of this country, given the issues that Trump is hitting at, which hit home with American voters, right now he has the edge.
So we've got some interesting comments about whether Kennedy should have been allowed. But I want to know, what are your thoughts on what do you think is going to be, before we close out? And I'm going to ask David first and then Adam. What do you think is going to be the most impactful deciding factor between now and November?
I think what will matter in this election is something the Biden campaign finally has woken up to. They're putting most of their money into the 7 states that can go either way. How California and Louisiana and Massachusetts and Mississippi are going to vote is baked in. Nothing is going to change. So the issue is what happens in those 7 states. You win elections when you have a ground game where you get people to the polls. So that means get them registered, number one. Make sure that they're on the rolls. And on election day, or days, because in a lot of places we have advanced voting, get them to cast their ballots. If you do that, you win. There's plenty of evidence showing that that's the case. Television ads move the needle among about 0.3% of voters. That could be enough in some elections to matter, but a ground game can move you by several percentage points because of turnout. And so I think in the 7 states that could go either way, that's going to be what's decisive. and getting people motivated to go to the polls. A lot of that's going to be about the Dobbs decision and women's reproductive health rights, and whether you and your doctor will make decisions or the government will be standing there making decisions for you.
Gosh, that scares me. Sorry about that, guys. My lights turned out. All right, there we go. It's time. Adam, what do you think about that?
I think it's going to be a close election. The edge goes to Trump. But one thing we're not talking about is that some states that would not normally be in play may be in play for Trump. And if that happens, the election's over. I'm talking about Virginia, where it's a virtual dead heat. I'm even talking about my home state of New Jersey, where Trump is behind by 9, not likely to win, but within striking distance. If he flips a New Jersey, a New Hampshire, or Virginia, he will be back in the White House for another 4 years. And I strongly suspect after 4 years, he will leave office and enjoy one of his many country clubs and look back on this as a wonderful experience that hopefully had some impact on the country. But like he said at the debate, if he didn't have to be here, he wouldn't be. And I think that you don't have to worry about him staying in office for the rest of his life.
Adam, I would agree with you about if Virginia or some other states are flipped, Donald will get back in the White House. But I've known Donald for 36 years. He has said he hates me more than any other journalist, and that's because everything I've written about him is absolutely factual. He's often threatened to sue me. He never has, because he knows I don't say or do things I can't prove, okay? And I assure you, I said in 2015, if Donald got to the White House, he wouldn't leave peacefully. He will not leave in 2029 if he's alive and healthy. And he has signaled this in a number of ways. And one of them is he just said the other day he's going to fire the woke generals and admirals. I want generals and admirals who are woke. They need to know about the cultures. Well, wait a second. You don't know what this means. If you don't understand the cultures of the countries that are hostile to us, you can't do your job as a general. That's why we spend a fortune educating generals and admirals, getting them doctoral degrees, having them study world history and culture so that they're deeply informed. And if Donald Trump starts firing generals and admirals, that's how he will take over the country, because there are always captains and majors and colonels who will sell out their country for their own glory.
Well, I want to add something.
Well, no, let me clarify.
Look what happened when he fired Look what happened when he fired the pandemic team, and then we got hit with a pandemic, and we didn't have any.
Well, Kim, I want to draw a little distinction here. David is talking about cultural competence, which is really, really important. We want our military leaders to be culturally competent because it's important to facilitate our interaction with other cultures. That's different from being woke. So I want to make that distinction clear. So, yeah, I would agree with David that that's an important characteristic to have. Well,
just watch. If Donald starts firing generals and admirals, that's part. You said he can't become dictator. Absolute nonsense. He can become dictator. He has to just have the right pieces in place. You can read the books about this written by Timothy Snyder of Yale, by Sarah Kendzior, who started out as a journalist and then became a student of authoritarian studies. There's lots of material out there about how a democracy becomes a dictatorship. In Rome, ancient Rome, it took 40 years for Rome to cease to be a republic and become a full-blown dictatorship. But the Constitution, at the end of the day, is a piece of paper, and whether you respect it or not determines its success. And Donald doesn't know what's in the Constitution, and he doesn't respect the Constitution, whatever he says publicly. Remember, he is a con artist. He's a man who plied 12-year-old kids with money to gamble with liquor. He was business partners for a decade with one of the biggest cocaine traffickers in America, for whom he did extraordinary favors that make no sense unless they're in business together. Hold on. He has consorted with serious criminals his whole life. He has cheated workers. He's cheated investors. He's lied on the public record all over the place. He was involved up to his eyeballs with Felix Sater in financial scams that involved Russia. he will say, he said, I wouldn't know what he looked like if we were in the same room. There's innumerable videotapes and still photos of the two of them traveling together on Donald's jet. He had an office right near Donald's in Trump Tower. I mean, Donald, it's really important to understand that while I agree that Donald has conned people into thinking he's presidential, Donald is a lifelong white-collar criminal. He steals with promises he breaks, never intends to keep, with contracts, and he's doing the same thing to the American people. He declares these things. That's why I think some people don't recognize what he's doing. Joe Biden's never said, I'm going to prosecute my enemies. He's had nothing to do with the prosecutions that have taken place, some in state court by elected local people, and the federal ones, he took all hands off once he appointed Merrick Garland. And by the way, he didn't stop the Justice Department from prosecuting his own son. He left Donald Trump's prosecutor in place to go after his son because that's the morally right thing to do. Donald will tell you he's a Christian. He doesn't know what's in the Bible. Whenever he's asked, he can't.
He sells it.
And he said, yeah, he sells it. And Donald has said repeatedly that Christians are fools, idiots, and schmucks, and that his life philosophy is one word. He said this while he was president. His life philosophy is revenge. No one who's a Christian believes in revenge. That is the antithesis of Christianity. So I think it's important to separate what Donald is selling as an image from the reality of who he is. He's the third generation head of a 4-generation white-collar crime family. And he's the greatest con artist in the history of the world.
Do I get to respond to this, Kim, or am I just
I want to add one thing to David's list, okay, is that I think
you're a neutral moderator.
Shares, but go ahead, Adam.
Well, I don't have much to say except that there's tens of millions of voters who might prefer a dictatorial Trump to a Democratic Biden, and this debate showed precisely why tonight. But that's really not what I'm talking about. For 8 years, the media, MSNBC, CNN, ABC, CBS, has relentlessly attacked this man in every way they could, more than any other politician or in person has been attacked before. Of course, he's a flawed person. Of course, he's done bad things. Well, so did Bill Clinton. So did my best friend. So did every other American on this planet. But the way he's portrayed practically as Satan is very hyperbolic and very inaccurate. Is he perfect? No. Is he a great man? Probably not. Is he a decent man? I'm sure in some facets of his life he is. And I'm sure that Joe Biden, in some facets of his life, is also a really good person. And I choose to look at the complexity of a person and focus sometimes on the good things they do, because if you want to be a united country, that's what you have to do, even when it's hard.
And I think neither of these men can do that. But let's kind of discuss one more thing that's really been pondering my mind and maybe some other people's. But what is going to be the factor, or what could we consider? What would cause there to be consideration that the voter fraud again? I want to bring that up because it seemed like, when Trump lost, all of a sudden voter fraud. If Biden loses, is there voter fraud?
If Biden loses, he's going to lose because the voters chose Donald Trump. Okay. Right. Donald would not answer clearly the question tonight. He conditioned it on whether it's a fair election. Okay. 61 judges heard the cases, many of them Republicans, some of them Trump appointees. There was no evidence, not a little, not a bit, zero evidence. There were complete fabrications that were made. Rudy Giuliani, has a $148 million libel judgment because he lied about what was happening. The Fox News has already paid $784 million in damages because it lied to its audience when it knew that it was lying. The reason they paid is they knew they were lying, that there was voter fraud involving voting machines. And so Donald's refusal to do what every other candidate for president in American history that I know of has said, which is, I lost. I mean, Al Gore made an initial challenge. Supreme Court ruled against him. He walked away. Richard Nixon lost to Kennedy. He walked away. And that's not what Donald is doing. And that's part of who Donald is. Donald Donald really believes inside that he is special, that he is not subject to laws, that he really should run the entire world, and that the rest of us are all idiots. And notice how many people tonight said, bad general, bad this, other people there to be held to account. He is not. So it's really, if people don't grasp that Donald Trump is a con artist, which all of his executives around him know. The reason that 40 of the 44 people in his cabinet and his vice president do not support him is they know who he is. They may not have known in the beginning, but they learned who he is. And Donald does a great job of covering this up, of making people look at the other thing. And that's how he's cheated the taxpayers, investors. He actually cheated people at one of his casinos. The only time that's ever happened in Atlantic City was at one of his casinos.
Well, I mean, they also took charitable funds and
he spent charitable funds on himself repeatedly, absolutely repeatedly.
So, I mean, you got to take those, but people don't care about that anymore.
Well,
so,
I agree with Adam's fundamental point that people don't care about these things, but if you don't care about them, that's how someone who, creates a fake university, I'm going to have the best professors, better than the business schools. And then it turns out that the people he hired were dishwashers and fast food managers, and none of whom had any skill or knowledge whatsoever. And he got one of the attorneys general, Bondi in Florida, to get off his back by making a huge campaign contribution from his charity, which is illegal. That's a crime.
Well, Adam, what's your response to that?
Trump won the debate, and this has been a great discussion tonight. David, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Adam.
Having a great conversation.
And I want to thank everyone else. I want to thank both of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share your intellectual opinions on this. And I hope that we see you again on American Politics as we follow this campaign all the way through to the bitter battle end. I hope that somewhere we do unite. Everyone, thank you for your time tonight. We have had tons and tons of comments. So I want to thank everyone for watching us tonight, and we'll see you next time. Don't forget, you can get your updates every morning on World Edition from 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to 11. And take care, everyone. Stay healthy, and you'll stay wealthy. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.